November 12, 1944, Tromsø Fjord, Norway. At 8:41 a.m., 32 Lancaster bombers appeared over the Norwegian mountains. Their target, the German battleship Tirpitz, anchored in a narrow inlet protected by smoke screens, anti-aircraft batteries, and torpedo nets. The Tirpitz had never been sunk. For 3 years, it had survived torpedoes, mines, and countless bombing raids. The British Admiralty had dedicated more resources to destroying this single ship than any other target in the European theater. In 12 minutes, that would change forever. The Tirpitz was Nazi Germany's largest battleship. Launched in 1939 and commissioned in 1941, it displaced 42,900 tons fully loaded and carried 8 15-inch guns capable of striking targets 15 miles away. Winston Churchill called it the Beast, not because of what it had done, but because of what it prevented. As long as the Tirpitz remained operational, the Royal Navy was forced to keep multiple capital ships in northern waters, tying down resources desperately needed elsewhere. Between 1942 and 1944, the British launched 12 major operations against the Tirpitz: submarine attacks, Maid submarine raids, carrier-based airstrikes. Every attempt had failed or caused only temporary damage. But by autumn 1944, the RAF had acquired a new weapon, a bomb so large and so powerful that it had never been used against a ship at sea. This is the verified account of Operation Catechism, the mission that finally killed the beast. The weapon was called Tallboy, designed by British engineer Barnes Wallis, the same man who created the bouncing bombs used against the Ruhr dams. The Tallboy weighed 12,000 pounds. It measured 21 feet long and 38 inches in diameter. When dropped from 18,000 feet, it reached speeds exceeding 750 miles per hour. The Tallboy was not designed to strike a ship directly. According to declassified Air Ministry documents, it was engineered to penetrate deep into the earth or concrete before detonating. The resulting shock wave would create what engineers called an earthquake effect, capable of destroying structures through ground vibration rather than direct impact. By November 1944, RAF Bomber Command had concluded that only Tallboy bombs could penetrate the Tirpitz's armored deck. But there was a problem. Only one squadron could carry them. 617 Squadron, known as the Dambusters after their successful 1943 raid on German dams, flew specially modified Lancaster bombers. Standard Lancasters could not accommodate the Tallboy's weight or size. The modified aircraft, designated Lancaster B Mark I Special, had their bomb bay doors removed, mid-upper gun turrets deleted, and armor stripped out to reduce weight. According to Royal Air Force operational records, 32 of these modified Lancasters assembled at Lossiemouth, Scotland, on November 11, 1944. They would fly 1,200 miles round-trip to Tromsø beyond the range of fighter escort. The squadron's commanding officer was Group Captain James Tate. His flight log, preserved in the RAF Museum archives, records his assessment of the mission. Weather unpredictable. Target heavily defended. Success depends entirely on visibility at altitude. The bombers carried 29 Tallboys between them. Several aircraft carried the smaller Johnny Walker mine as backup. Each Tallboy cost approximately 4,000 pounds, roughly 200,000 pounds in today's currency. The entire mission represented an enormous investment of resources and engineering expertise. At 3 a.m. on November 12th, the Lancasters took off into darkness. The Tirpitz sat in Kiai Sound, a narrow inlet near Tromsø in northern Norway. German naval records from November 1944 show the ship was no longer fully operational. Allied air attacks in September had damaged its engines, making it incapable of sailing to open water. But it remained a threat. its guns could still fire. Its presence still required British naval resources to remain on station, and German Naval Command had refused to scrap it. Captain Robert Weber commanded the Tirpitz. His war diary, captured by Allied forces in 1945 and now housed in German military archives, describes the ship's defensive preparations. Smoke generators lined the shore, ready to obscure the vessel within minutes of an air raid warning. Anti-aircraft crews manned 40 20mm guns, 14 37mm guns, and 16 105mm guns. The ship's position in shallow water, only 50 feet deep, was deliberate. German naval planners believed this would prevent the ship from capsizing if hit. The shallow draft meant the Tirpitz would settle onto the seabed rather than roll over. This assumption would prove catastrophic. On the morning of November 12th, Norwegian resistance operatives reported clear skies over Tromsø. Radio operators transmitted the coded message: "The weather is favorable." At 8:35 a.m., radar operators aboard the Tirpitz detected incoming aircraft at high altitude. The alarm sounded. Smoke generators activated. Within 4 minutes, thick artificial fog rolled across the water, designed to make visual bombing impossible. But the Lancasters were already at 14,000 feet and climbing. Group Captain Tate's aircraft led the formation. According to RAF operational records, the bombers approached in 3 waves, staggered at different altitudes between 12,000 and 16,000 feet to avoid collisions. The plan required visual bombing. The Tallboy's accuracy depended on bombardiers seeing the target clearly through their stabilized automatic bomb sight, a sophisticated optical device that calculated wind speed, aircraft velocity, and altitude to determine the precise release point. At 8:41 a.m., the smoke screen was incomplete. Strong winds over the fjord had dispersed the artificial fog faster than German crews could generate it. Flight Lieutenant Bruce Buckham, flying as Tate's bomb aimer, recorded in his post-mission debrief: "Target clearly visible. Wind from northeast dispersing smoke. Initiated bombing run at Angels 1-4, 14,000 feet." The first Tallboy dropped at 8:41 a.m. and 30 seconds. German naval logs record what happened next. Multiple explosions in rapid succession. The first Tallboy struck the water 40 yards from the Tirpitz's port side. The underwater detonation created a massive pressure wave that buckled the ship's hull plating. 17 seconds later, a second Tallboy struck the ship directly. The bomb penetrated the Tirpitz's armored deck between the port side anti-aircraft battery and the ship's funnel. It detonated inside the vessel, below the armor belt designed to protect against naval shells. The explosion ripped through multiple decks, igniting ammunition magazines and fuel storage compartments. A third Tallboy struck near the bow, penetrating the forward section and detonating in the number 1 magazine. Squadron leader Tony Iveson, piloting one of the attacking Lancasters, stated in a 1987 interview recorded by the Imperial War Museum, "We saw the explosions. Massive columns of smoke and flame. The flak stopped almost immediately. We knew we'd hit something critical." The entire attack lasted 11 minutes. Of the 29 Tallboys dropped, at least 2 scored direct hits. Several near misses detonated close enough to cause severe structural damage through shockwave effect, exactly as Barnes Wallis had designed. At 8:52 a.m., the Tirpitz began to list. Captain Weber's war diary contains no entries after 8:40 a.m. Subsequent German naval reports, compiled from survivor testimony and analyzed by Allied intelligence after the war, described the ship's final moments. The direct hit amidships had destroyed the port side bulkheads. Water flooded into compartments faster than damage control teams could seal them. The list increased from 5 degrees to 15 degrees within 3 minutes. At 8:50 a.m., the list reached 25 degrees. Crew members below decks began evacuating through hatches as interior lighting failed. Emergency generators activated, but secondary explosions from ignited ammunition continued to tear through the ship's interior. At 8:52 a.m., the list exceeded 40 degrees. The ship's shallow anchorage, intended to prevent capsizing, now accelerated it. As the port side settled onto the seabed, the starboard side rose into the air. The ship's massive weight and momentum created rotational forces that German engineers had not accounted for. At 8:54 a.m., the Tirpitz capsized completely. The ship rolled onto its port side, then continued rotating until it settled upside down on the shallow seafloor, its hull exposed to the air. Approximately 1,700 men were aboard when the attack began. German naval casualty records, declassified in the 1970s, confirmed that 971 crew members died. Most were trapped in compartments below the waterline when the ship capsized. Norwegian rescue boats operating from Tromsø harbor recovered survivors clinging to the exposed hull. German damage control teams attempted to cut through the steel plating with acetylene torches to reach trapped sailors. Survivor testimony from these efforts, collected by Norwegian authorities in 1945, describes hearing hammering from inside the hull that continued for several hours. By November 13th, all sound from within the hull had ceased. The Lancasters returned to Lossiemouth at 1:30 p.m. All aircraft returned safely. No crew members were injured. Post-mission aircraft inspection revealed minor flak damage to 3 bombers, none requiring more than routine repairs. Group Captain Tate's official mission report, filed with RAF Bomber Command on November 13, 1944, concluded, target believed destroyed. Large explosion observed. Ship seen to capsize. Smoke visible from 80 miles distance on return flight. Photographic reconnaissance aircraft confirmed the sinking on November 13th. Aerial photographs, now archived at the Imperial War Museum, show the Tirpitz's hull completely inverted in shallow water. The Tirpitz had never fired its main guns against an enemy ship. Yet its destruction altered British naval strategy immediately. Admiralty records from November 1944 show that within 48 hours of the confirmed sinking, orders were issued to redeploy capital ships previously stationed in northern waters. The battleship HMS Duke of York, the aircraft carrier HMS Implacable, and multiple cruisers and destroyers were reassigned to Pacific operations or returned to home ports for refit. This freed up thousands of naval personnel and supporting resources. According to declassified Admiralty assessments from late 1944, maintaining the home fleet at sufficient strength to counter the Tirpitz had required approximately 12% of the Royal Navy's total operational capacity. Ships' fuel, ammunition, and personnel that could have been deployed elsewhere remained in Scotland and Iceland specifically because of this single German vessel. The economic cost was substantial. A 1946 parliamentary report calculated that operations against the Tirpitz between 1942 and 1944 consumed approximately £4.5 million in direct military expenditure, equivalent to roughly £225 million today when adjusted for inflation. But the strategic cost was greater. Convoy operations to the Soviet Union, the Arctic convoys carrying war material to Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, had been repeatedly delayed or rerouted because of the Tirpitz threat. British naval planning documents from 1943 and 1944 show that convoy schedules were adjusted based on intelligence regarding the battleship's operational status. When the Tirpitz was confirmed destroyed, these constraints disappeared. Convoy frequency increased. Routes became more direct. Soviet supply lines strengthened. Winston Churchill's personal papers, preserved in the Churchill Archive Center, include a telegram sent to King George VI on November 13, 1944. The Tirpitz has been sunk. The RAF has achieved what the fleet could not. One of our heaviest naval burdens has been lifted. German Naval Command reached similar conclusions. Grand Admiral Karl Dönnitz's war diary, entered as evidence at the Nuremberg trials and now accessible through the U.S. National Archives, contains an entry from November 14, 1944. Loss of Tirpitz eliminates our last capital ship threat in northern waters. Surface fleet operations now restricted to Baltic defense. The strategic balance in northern Europe had shifted permanently. The wreck of the Tirpitz remained in Tromsø Fjord until 1948. Norwegian salvage companies, contracted by the Allied occupation authorities, began cutting up the hull for scrap metal in 1946. According to Norwegian maritime records, the operation took 2 years. Salvage crews used explosives and industrial cutting equipment to dismantle sections of armor plating weighing up to 15 tons. Some sections could not be removed. The ship's massive propeller shafts, each weighing several tons, remain embedded in the seabed. Norwegian diving surveys conducted in the 1970s and 1980s documented these remnants, along with unexploded ammunition still scattered across the fjord floor. The human cost of Operation Catechism remained a subject of controversy. German veterans organizations in the post-war period argued that attacking a ship no longer capable of sailing constituted an unnecessary loss of life. British official histories countered, as long as the Tirpitz's guns remained operational, it represented a legitimate military target. Families of the 971 German sailors who died in the sinking received official notification from German naval authorities between December 1944 and February 1945. Standard casualty telegrams, examples of which are preserved in the German Federal Archives, stated only, "Died in action." Further details withheld for security reasons. The full circumstances of the sinking were not publicly disclosed by German authorities until after the war. The 729 survivors of the Tirpitz's crew were transferred to other naval assignments or returned to Germany. Post-war interviews with survivors, conducted by German naval historians in the 1950s and 1960s, described the psychological impact of the capsizing. Multiple accounts mention the horror of hearing trapped crewmates hammering on the hull from inside, sounds that rescue teams could do nothing to stop. Captain Robert Weber survived. He was pulled from the water by Norwegian rescue boats and spent the remainder of the war in administrative positions. His personal papers, donated to the German Maritime Museum in the 1970s, include a single-page account of November 12th, written in 1958. The final line reads, "The ship died quickly. The men did not." No member of 617 Squadron was killed or injured during Operation Catechism. The destruction of the Tirpitz represented the culmination of 3 years of sustained British effort. Between 1942 and 1944, the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force conducted 12 major operations against the battleship. These included Operation Tidal in October 1942, in which Norwegian commandos attempted to sink the ship using human torpedoes. Operation Source in September 1943, in which British ex-craft Mayit submarines placed limpet mines beneath the hull. And multiple fleet air arm strikes from aircraft carriers operating in Norwegian waters. Each operation achieved partial success or outright failure. The Tirpitz survived torpedo damage. It survived mine damage. It survived bombing raids. German repair crews working in Norwegian fjords, far from Allied air bases, repeatedly restored the ship to operational status. Only the Tallboy bomb, dropped from sufficient altitude by specially modified aircraft, proved capable of penetrating the battleship's armor. The technological lesson was clear. Naval armor, designed to resist horizontal attack from naval guns and torpedoes, could not withstand vertical attack from heavy bombs traveling at supersonic speeds. This reality would shape naval architecture and aircraft carrier doctrine for decades after the war. Barnes Wallis, the Tallboy's designer, received no public recognition during the war. Security classifications prevented any discussion of the weapon specifications or operational use. He was appointed commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1945, but the citation made no mention of the Tallboy or his role in sinking the Tirpitz. 617 Squadron continued operations until the end of the war. The unit participated in attacks on German infrastructure targets, using Tallboy and the even larger Grand Slam bomb to destroy viaducts, U-boat pens, and reinforced bunkers. The squadron's casualty rate remained remarkably low compared to other bomber units, a testament to the high-altitude precision bombing techniques that made the Tirpitz mission possible. The strategic impact of Operation Catechism extended beyond the immediate redeployment of British naval assets. It demonstrated that even the most heavily armored warships could be destroyed by air power alone, without requiring engagement by surface fleets. This principal air superiority, as the decisive factor in naval warfare, would dominate strategic thinking in the post-war era. Today, the wreck site in Tromsø Fjord is marked by Norwegian authorities as a war grave. Diving is prohibited without special permission. Fragments of the Tirpitz's armor plating, salvaged during the 1946-1948 recovery operation, are displayed in the Norwegian Armed Forces Museum in Oslo and the Imperial War Museum in London. The beast died on November 12, 1944. It took 12 minutes